This is Limor Schafman here at CES 2014 for RCR Wireless. It's my pleasure to have here Rob McDowell from the Hudson Institute and also a former FCC commissioner. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we were just in a session, and you were just speaking on a session about IP networking and how vital it is. Now, CES this year focused highly on the Internet of Things. So some of us might consider this self-explanatory, why IP is so important, but why don't you take us a little bit through it, because I'm not sure that everyone here in our listening audience is as aware or as knowledgeable about why IP plays such a vital role in the future that we're envisioning.
Sure. IP stands for Internet Protocol. It is a computer language essentially invented about 40 years ago by Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn. And what it does is it provides the foundation for devices, computers basically, to talk to each other. It's going to be the bedrock of virtually all communications throughout the globe. It'll be people talking to people, machines talking to machines. About 61% of all internet traffic is actually not human-oriented. It's machines talking to other machines. And this is only going to grow as we evolve into the next phase of our communications. We're going to have devices embedded in our bodies talking to our doctors or talking to other machines. We're going to have our cars talking to us. We're going to have the refrigerator telling us that the blueberries have mold or the milk is spoiled or whatever the case might be. Or it might be telling the grocery store to send a delivery. So it's going to create a wonderful revolution that will only improve the human condition throughout the globe.
So where does IP stand today?
Well, so these communications platforms are evolving from the old days when we had old wireline, copper, phone, voice-only communication. It was all analog. And so companies, whether they're wireless companies or if they're fiber-based companies, are building new technologies, and they are trying to invest heavily in that space. Their IP networks are much more efficient than the old networks. They're much more powerful. They're much more robust. And we want the world to evolve into that space as quickly as possible. So from my perspective, I'm looking at the public policy implications, what roadblocks or barriers can be removed in order to make this happen more quickly, because that's what's best for consumers.
So what are some of the roadblocks that you find that are in place?
Well, here in the U.S., we have a lot of laws that are based on the 1934 Communications Act. And that actually derives a lot of its logic and thinking from the 1880s, from the regulation of railroad monopolies. And that is still being applied to the telecom networks of today. But then there are a different set of rules for different types of wireless networks, or at least 3 different types of wireless regulations. And then cable companies, if they're using coaxial cable, they have yet another set of regulations. So you have all these stovepipes of regulations that actually distort the market, that distort investment decisions. So part of what I'm working on at the Hudson Institute is to try to get, the world, anyone who will listen, to buy into the notion of we need to reform and modernize these things. Look at new rules and laws through the eyes of consumers. Is there any consumer harm arising from some sort of market failure? If so, how can it be cured? How can it be narrowly tailored? And will it sunset at some point, because markets and technologies are evolving so rapidly that laws frequently outlive their usefulness or their purpose? So we should be refreshing the regulatory landscape from, let's say, every 5 to 10 years.
All right, then let's talk about the reality of such a case. I mean, we are seeing some significant issues currently in our Congress. So let's be frank. I mean, that might be necessary, and that might be necessary from a technological perspective. But what kind of messaging do we then, from the telecom industry, what can we do to help facilitate this process? Is there something that we need to be making clear to our policymakers so that we can help push this forward?
Absolutely. First of all, the FCC later this month in January is going to initiate a notice of proposed rulemaking on the IP transition, a petition filed actually by AT&T, to just start a series of test beds, voluntary test beds, throughout the country to see what can be done to help migrate the networks to their next generation while still protecting consumers. So folks should definitely comment in that proceeding. It's very important to hear everyone's perspective on that, all of their hopes and all of their fears at the same time, and their dreams. And then I would talk to your members of Congress there's a lot going on. And, here at the Consumer Electronics Show is a fantastic example of incredible innovation and ideas. Some of these ideas won't stick, but a lot of them will. But we want to make sure there's not some inadvertent, unintended consequence by a government rule or a law that's preventing a market, some sort of idea from getting to the marketplace. And that's what we can't measure, is what didn't make it into the hands of consumers because of some rules. So innovators and entrepreneurs should always check in with their members of Congress. Members of Congress would love to meet with you to find out what it is you're doing, and is there something the government can do to either get out of the way or help you do that.
And this is an international show, so we've been talking a little bit about the United States and the marketplace here. What do you see happening abroad, and how does the global footprint and IP all match together?
I have a lot of concerns about what's happening internationally. So as we see the Internet of Things and the Internet of Everything start to grow, that means a tremendous amount of information is going to be in the hands of people who barely had food and water in their hands, if they had that at all, as a matter of fact. So when they have that kind of information, where are their crops, what's the weather going to be like, what's happening in their country's capital, etc., that actually threatens a lot of authoritarian regimes. Most of the world is not run by democratic governments, it's run by authoritarian regimes. This tends to be in the developing world. So there are movement afoot to try to have international regulation of the internet governance and things of that nature. And this is not some conspiracy theory, this is actually happening. There's a big treaty negotiation that culminates later this year in October in Busan, South Korea. And a lot of this could happen at that treaty negotiation. 193 countries will meet there, and we'll see what happens. But inch by inch, slowly, incrementally over the past decade, we've seen a slow power grab on the international scene. The business is called the multilateral scene, for regulation of a lot of these issues. And that would only stifle innovation. It would inhibit investment. It would inhibit the proliferation of these technologies, and actually, I think the evolution of the human condition would suffer as a result.
Now, again, is there something that we here in the United States, or our audience here, can be doing something with regard to that upcoming meeting and preparing for it, or I don't know, somehow being there? Would that be helpful?
Absolutely, and if there's anyone listening, outside of the United States, I would certainly talk to your home governments about concerns there. That the best environment to have is an unfettered environment for the internet space. That's what's enabled it to explode the way that it has, just in 15 years, basically. And so talk to your governments, tell them that you have an innovation, or you're a consumer of an innovation, and you want that trend to continue, and you're worried about how a new layer of international regulation or multilateral regulation might slow that down.
So let's switch now to a topic that's near and dear to my heart because of my past involvement, IPv6. Talk to us a little bit IPv6. What is the state of it right now? People have been talking about it forever, waiting for it. It's kind of happening. It's not really being taken advantage really very creatively, possibly. Where are we with that, and what do you see happening with it?
Sure. So IPv6, this is all about internet addressing. So any device you can think of has an internet address. So your smartphone, your tablet, your computer, maybe your car even. And as we add more things to the Internet of Things and the Internet of Everything, we're going to need more addresses. So it's a numbering system, essentially, and we're running out of numbers. So we need to move to IPv6 and actually start thinking really quickly about how to evolve past IPv6, because we'll move from billions to trillions of IP addresses, and then we will quickly move from trillions to quadrillions or quintillions and beyond. So can we add a whole new dynamic system that can actually enable this to spread without any slowdown, any inhibition whatsoever? And it's absolutely important that we raise it and we work on it. It's terrific for you to ask that question. It's really geeky, but it's really important as we get more and more devices. As you see here at the Consumer Electronics Show, almost everything here is going to have an IP address, and multiply that out by, like, your milk carton could have a little chip in it to track its inventory. Where is it? Is it spoiled? I mean, and that's going to need an IP address. And over the years, all of them will get consumed. So what are we going to do about it?
And so are the forums actually working, the IEEE and et cetera, to standardize? What's the next thing that you see happening with IPv6?
Well, absolutely.
IPv10, as we were saying.
Exactly. So yeah, a lot of the engineering groups have already made these standardizations. It's for industry to adopt. It's for governments to adopt. It's for the multi-stakeholder internet governance groups, which are not governmental. They're private sector but nonprofit, for them to all get on board. But we need, for the manufacturers of devices or milk cartons or whatever to start adopting these things. And once it starts getting adopted, those new IPv6 addresses will start to fly off the shelves and get consumed very, very quickly. And that's why we do need to move to an IPv10 or something completely different that's more dynamic.
So going back to the FCC as a former chairman, not chairman, I'm sorry, commissioner,
Well, thanks for the promotion.
at least for an instant. What is the FCC, what possibly should it do with regard to IP and facilitating what we're seeing here at CES?
So, as I said earlier, the FCC is initiating a notice of proposed rulemaking later this month, and that's a good positive step. I think they need to stick to a tight time frame and make it aggressive. I don't want to see this to be something that just gets deliberated forever and there's never any action. So I think that's very, very important. They'll make it voluntary, and that's good. There'll be a lot of companies that sign up for different markets to try these experiments, these test beds. But to put shot clocks and a time frame on it is absolutely important so that we just don't kick it down the road. It's 2014 already, and 2016 is a presidential election year. And sometimes there are bursts of activity in between presidential election cycles in our country. We don't want to see it just slow down and waiting for the next president to deal with this issue, or his FCC or her FCC. But so let's get it going. Let's have a resolution by the end of 2016 on what the rules of the road are going to be, and that will help everybody.
So let's add another year, 2025. What do you see things being like at that time?
I think they'll be phenomenal. First of all, I think we're just entering the golden age of wireless. We haven't talked about how this new Internet of Things or everything is going to consume a lot of spectrum, a lot of the radio airwaves. So what are we going to do about the consumption of spectrum? Under Cooper's law, our spectral efficiency doubles about every 2.5 years, but the federal government in the U.S. sits on about 80% of some of the best spectrum. So what can we do to incentivize some of these agencies to get off that spectrum? I can't imagine all of it's being used efficiently. Some of it's very important, but some of it's not being used that efficiently. So hopefully Congress can address this in short order. This is an issue which doesn't tend to be partisan at all. Republicans and Democrats can be unified, and for a number of reasons. So what can we do there? And then also, what can we do to promote technologies that do provide these spurts of spectral efficiency, wringing more efficiency out of the airwaves that we have already? And that's a very exciting area. So it's sort of like, in Manhattan, is it more efficient in Lower Manhattan to build a one-story gas station or a skyscraper? And so if you think of spectrum as real estate, we want efficiency. We want to build skyscrapers basically on the best usable spectrum. It's going to be a very exciting time in 2025.
Rob, thank you so much for joining us. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Best of luck.
And thank you for joining us here at CES 2014 and RCR Wireless. Stay more so you can hear about what's going on the show floor.